done. And now we can take these clones and we can start separating them. And I can turn this motion off so you can get a better idea. You can see they're stacked on the z-axis, but we're diverging them and then reconverging them. And we can now start manipulating them in interesting ways. Since they're still just individual objects, we can start adding rotations to them. Stack rotations. Okay. And then I've been experimenting a lot with trying to make things with negative spaces and interesting cycles of color and intensity to make them kind of soft-edged, kind of organic, and a little more nebulous than this sort of really crisp, hard-edged things. So let's add a color modifier. And in LSX, there are two sets of modifiers. There are pre-modifiers and post-modifiers. Pre-modifiers run on individual elements, and post-modifiers run on the entire frames. So I'm going to add a post-color modulator, and this is now operating on the entire frame instead of the individual elements that we're moving around. And you can see we've got channels for red, green, and blue, and a channel for intensity. So since this is really not very interesting because the symmetry is bad, it's just not a very pleasing arrangement. Instead of doing color shifts on the x-axis, let's do color shifts based on point count. And that brings us a little bit to a more interesting place, or let's do it based on the z-axis, which is even nicer. And you can alter these. The color intensities right now are being based on cosine waves, so they're ripples of colors. If you want, you can base them on an expression. So you can see here the intensity of this color value is varying between 0 and 1. If you didn't want that, you could put, what's hard for the value 1 to 1. So that color is always on now, no matter what the other colors are doing. Or you can actually just turn off individual color channels, which is kind of a nice step towards getting things that are soft and organic. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time with is then applying intensity modulations over the entire frames. And if you've seen things like the strange 12 show that I was showing last night, there's big ripples of intensity that wash through frames, and those ripples, even the speed of the ripples changes as the show progresses. And what I'm doing there is I'm doing intensity changes based on the z-axis, and I'm changing the number of sine curves which affect the intensity ripples based on sine waves and repeats. So you get some really kind of intriguing things going on. But very, very easily, I created something that has a nice amount of eye candy. So this is a very small number of points. If I'm not talking through it, it takes 30 seconds or a minute to create this effect. And it's a pretty pleasing effect. And then you can go through and add things like some perspective, and you'll certainly see that sort of shape in some of my shows. But the other thing is, as this is running, you can say, what, I don't really like these circles. Let's maybe switch to some dots, or what about a line? So there's just a lot of exploration to be done while you're doing this sort of thing. Or let's change my phone now to something kind of extreme. So and I use shapes like this a lot. the backgrounds of things. Since LSX allows you to use layers and surfaces to overlay and reveal things that are behind and in front, and I'll let David talk that through. But it's a good way to reduce point count, and it's a good way to add complexity behind things. But we can take that now, or we can take that a little bit later if you want to. Wherever you want.
Okay. Well, this is the basics.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's switch on for a second. Now, I've been using LSX. I was a Mamba user before this, and for those of you that haven't seen 3 before, it's relatively basic in what you can do as far as manipulations. A lot of things you saw Chris doing with color and things like that. Media Loss doesn't have the capability of doing. They tend to do things a little more frame-based instead. So you can recolor background. You can recolor a frame based on some background bitmap or something like that. They'll take those types of frames to try to accomplish some of the color transitions, but it's not dynamic like you've seen with Chris's demonstration just had. So being about 1.5 years in, I am certainly no expert, but I wanted to bring you through a couple probably lesser known tricks that LSX has that provides yet another way of performing some functions. And one of the things that I find really interesting about LSX is, any of us that have been using it for a month, a year, multiple years, we all kind of approach the same thing differently. Think of any other large tool. Let's say you're an accountant and you use Excel. You can accomplish a variety of tasks in multiple different ways, and that's kind of one of the things that I really enjoy about LSX. I can throw a problem and solve it, create a type of effect, and then I can get on PL's chat room, and Chris will say, well, I would have done it this way, or anybody else will jump in and have a completely different approach to it. Well, so this is one of the things that we can do with LSX is actually a frame-based trick called parts. So I'm going to bring up the 3D tool editor here. I'm going to bring up the point attributes. Now, one of the things that you see here, the point number that you're looking at right here is the point 22. The color of that particular point. The next thing you can see here is the part number. Now, there are 0 through 7 identifiers for parts. So basically what you can do to add enters in a frame, I could change these all to different numbers, not do anything with them, and when I display the frame, you're going to see a circle just like this. However, by changing point to point, you can see here that I've started rotating between 0 and 7 for each one of the points. Now I've got the ability to individually control that point separate of the others, simply by saying I only want to manipulate one or multiple parts of this particular object. So switching back. For each one of the events, now in this particular case, what you can do with parts is limited to rotate functions, moves, which include pre, post, and anything that is a curve pre and post, pivots and scale. So some things, colors you can't manipulate by part, at least not yet. But for each one of the, whether it actually works or not, each type of manipulation that you can do to a frame has the ability to define a property to it, and one of those properties is parts. So you can see, here that this particular manipulation will only affect those points that are defined with part number 6. And so you can, by doing several of these, you can see kind of a sloppy implementation. We've got a whole bunch of manipulations, and each one of these is going to be impacting a different part. The net effect of that, the intent of this is simply to manipulate those parts, and what this refers to is I want it to look at the frequencies generated by the music, and basically they range from 0 to 1, and something lower on the scale is going to be a lower tone. And I want that particular part to move in whatever direction the music is for that particular portion of the audio spectrum. So the net effect of that, in this example.
We're actually, there's a Ether3 network DAC in this projector. So laptops are connected to a switch to the single DAC. And just by trading off, so it means that we don't have to change cables and do anything like that. But I unplugged the DAC and I was wiring the switch.
And we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about the DAC being wired to a particular computer or anything like that. It'll just work. Okay. So what you can see here is that we've got a fairly low tone music that's affecting just the parts that we're manipulating here. As different tones come in, it's affecting other parts. Now this is kind of a rudimentary example. We start rotating on the Z-axis here. Here's another example of parts.
I can write a little bit just so we can do that.
Here in this example, we can see this thing in the background here appearing and disappearing. Again, that's just caused by scale affecting a particular part. So you can take one frame and do all kinds of interesting manipulations with it simply by assigning one of these attributes to a particular part.
I have not seen this show.
It's not done, that's fine. It's one of those ones that's sitting forever.
You're holding on us.
Another example of this, watching Bill's presentation, kind of as far as the 3D manipulation that Beyond has built in. This is kind of a simpler example of multi-program. Yeah, I'm trying to show this okay. So in this particular example, we've got a frame that's just a basic sun, but some of those, again, are parts that we're manipulating to give it kind of that flickery effect. Now, these are all kind of rudimentary examples, but you can see where you can go with this. For example, if you had a face on the screen, you could assign parts to different parts of the mouth and make it smile for you by changing its relative position or its size. The next thing I wanted to bring your attention to is something called surfaces. Now, Chris mentioned that they're great for a great number of things, including wipes. Here in this example, what we've got is what we're building is a series of keys. Now, each one of these is a separate frame which defines a particular surface with the intent of building a keyboard. And within each one of these, we've got something called show on surface. So basically, the higher the number that you can find here, and you've got 1 through 31 layers that you can put on. So you can build three-dimensional objects, assign a lower surface number to the ones that are behind or below, and then as other things move on top of them, they get hidden or revealed depending on the angle as you twist them around. So in this particular example, we use surfaces, and I think I actually maxed it out. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of portions of keys as the keyboard comes across, so that it's hiding those parts. Now, I'm scanning with white, I'm not sure what this is going to look like. Okay. Kind of hard to see it. Getting a little wide for it. Well, perhaps you can see better in the preview window. You can see that the backs of each one of the keys, you can't see it as it's coming towards you. But any part that's exposed once the other key gets out of the way, you can see everything behind it.
So you're doing hidden line removal without actually having to
Exactly, without having to actually do any real work. All I have to do is figure out where the surface is and which one's on top and which one isn't. And I can rotate it around and you'll see whatever's supposed to be exposed. And this is probably a good point. We want to talk a little bit more about how you hide and reveal.
Sure. Yeah.
Unique
Yeah.
aspect.
Okay. So we have this. We'll just kind of keep going with this dot again. So let's add.
What did you add?
I just added another SFX loop. Just so I can, so we don't have to make this big long stack of events on the timeline. So I'm just going to add an event, just a frame, and let's get something nice and simple. See if we can find that. Here's a circle. If you've ever worked with Photoshop or Illustrator or a drawing program, you know about layers, and layers can be in front or behind or on the same layer. And these two objects are on the same layer, so they're both being displayed with the same priority. And what I can do is I can say, I can put the circle in front of the stars just by changing the surface that it's being displayed on. So now, even though we've added to the complexity of the image, we've actually made it easier to scan because there's less points. Because in LSX, when you have things that are behind things, it's not that it's reducing the intensity to zero, it's actually not scanning these points. So you've just simplified your frame and made it easier to display, but you've also made it a little more visually interesting. So we can maybe add a little bit of size on this. And negative numbers are valid. In this case, 0 is a point, but -2 brings it larger again because it's basically flipping. And so it's sort of bouncing now, which is a little nicer motion than just shrinking and growing. It makes it a little more organic and a little more engaging. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So the opposite of occluding is including. So now this circle is trapping everything and only revealing what's behind it when the circle's big. And this allows you to do things like transitions where you have a frame being played and you have a circle that opens up in the frame and obscures what you were watching but shows you what's behind it. I have a background doing video work, and so what I've been trying to do in a lot of my shows is transitions where you're not just going, just doing like a jump cut between one scene to another scene. But
Or a crossfade or something.
Well,
That's
you
a
can't,
lot more elegant.
right. Doing crossfade in LaserShow is really hard because at some point you're displaying double the number of points. And if you have something that's complex, it's going to be really visible because your scanning is absolutely.
So you'd be able to, for example, like you were just playing with the point count, that's now giving you this variable magic.
Well, point count may not be controllable,
Okay.
but all of these that have these buttons underneath that allow you to input an expression are controllable.
Okay.
And basically what you do is you set lower and an upper range for that control.
Okay.
And then you can twiddle that with a MIDI, with a DMX, with an OSC, with the Microsoft Connect, or any way of getting data and can be captured here.
Great.
On the last screen where it has the push button thing, the sliders in it, I think one of them might be point count.
Really?
One of them is scan speed.
Scan speed?
Yes, it is scan speed, yeah.
All right.
There is a point count slider. I'm pretty sure I've mapped that to my PC at one point.
Okay. Yeah, because
I have
that's
not seen that in that abstract editor, but there may be additional ways to do it. But it's very easy to get very, very beautiful magic out of this. Just small amounts of effort, but to me, it's just all about finding the right harmonic.
So if you change projectors, would you have to change these points in all of your effects to kind of match a different situation?
No, it's more about point speed for that scanning setting. Like I changed very small amount of scanning settings to use that mixed gas system with TurboTrax and GS120s. And really all I did was change a little bit of blanking shift to get rid of the tails on things. But I didn't go through and change points to these abstracts and things because all those scanning settings are being driven at the same point rate at 30 kbps.
That's just so that's really.
Yes.
Shifting back to layers and surfaces for a moment, is there a z-axis value that will cause something in a lower layer to punch through to an upper layer or another surface, or are those surfaces
No,
absolutely
you assign us.
ordered?
Those are absolute, no matter where you are on z-axis. However, you could do something called z-clipping and basically say that anytime that object goes beyond a certain point on the z-axis, it will disappear.
Right.
So if you have, let's say, a circle or a square that is being pushed back and forth, you can have it cut out as it hits that line, like it's going into a line.
Right. And you can also do depth queuing. I'm not sure if this abstract would be appropriate for that, but by setting 3.5, like a 0, or maybe a -0.2. So some of these abstracts are 3D, and as they rotate, portions will appear and portions will fade out very, very gracefully. And I think some of that is going on here, but let's see. Yeah, so I mean, you can definitely see the impact of this and definitely. And some of these things, as people like Patrick and people like you, John, know, some of these things coming out of LaserShow editors are 3D.
Yeah.
And when you get a 3D harmonic, you can perform rotations on them in LSX and see those additional surfaces and additional complexities from other angles. And stuff just really starts getting beautiful very, very quickly. And that's, but again, let's say, let me turn off that rotation. Let's say, oops, turn off that rotation. So maybe this is something that you really like, but you're just not quite able to scan it fast enough to display stably. A really nice trick. Well, actually, what I was just going to do is just click the edges. So a really nice trick that I use in a number of my shows when things start getting complicated is just to put things inside of a circle. So instead of scanning full edges of the square, we're going to clip the edges out. Okay, so I've captured it. Now I'll increase the size to a point where I can scan this. Okay, let's take that down a little bit. 4. Okay, so now we've just put it in a circle and we've reduced the point count, but we're drawing a circle, so we're still kind of making the scanners unhappy. So now I've clipped the edges of the square into a circle, and it's not very noticeable, but we've decreased the number of points that are being scanned. So maybe we could add another crumb, or maybe we could just add additional points into that abstract and see things that we weren't seeing before.
My eyes!
It's a lot of tripping balls, man.
Mind blown.
Yeah, so, you know, you get some really beautiful, nice old school stuff really, really easily. And, you know, the secret to my shows is this editor, and this is often aimed for some of my shows with transitions and little things happening on music beats and music strikes just to try to keep shaking things up a little bit, and just to try to make sure that it shows our safety music or this is that's.
Yeah, I'll add a couple more things, and then we'll be able to have to further dispel the myth that you have to be a mathematician to get LSX to work. I want to demonstrate a couple things that you can do that are math, but you're still not typing in equations. So here we have a fairly simple square getting bigger. Not very interesting. Just for simplicity, I'm going to go into the attributes within the animation tree film as opposed to add something underneath it. So basically, we have a very boring linear curve. Now, Chris mentioned earlier, you can make things get bigger and larger with sine waves. But for interest, particularly with beam shows, I found myself playing with exponential curves quite a bit so that things accelerate or decelerate as they go through. So here you can see an inverse where it's a very exciting appearance, and then it just kind of slows down as it reaches its max size. And of course, you can take the opposite effect and have it get faster as it goes through.
So it's coming towards you.
Yes.
Can you kind of grab a point on that curve and kind of spline it like
That? No.
Newland's going to go over the curves in just a second here. So
Not in the center, but.
yeah, not in the center, but you are capable of it. There's quite a bit of things that you can do here. One of the things that we didn't talk about yet is repeats. So here we have just basically a switch in size where it switches from its low value of 0.2 to its max value of 1. But I can sit there and say, well, let's do this 10 times. And all of a sudden we get that flash back and forth. Now you can apply these types of waveforms to anything pretty much in LSX. So it's really great for intensity to have things strobe in and out. We're just at some more interest. There's just tons of waveforms that you can grab.
And there's steps.
There's multiple steps.
And all these things can be controlled by the
They can be
NX or
hooked.
LC or anything.
they can be hooked? Yeah, sweet.
I wanted to point out. This comes up as a question quite a bit. One of the things that you can do is actually add something that's random, and this will jump all over the place. Now we can say, let's not actually have it. If we actually watch this in real time, you'll see it's just going wacky. So what we can do is add a number of steps. So here we see it's kind of jumping all over the place, but it's consistent here. Now I can change what this is good for is if I want to copy this particular example somewhere else, that randomness will be copied along with it. Now if I wanted to go and change it because I didn't like the sequence that it chose at random, I can hit the little dice button and it'll bring up new variations to the curve. So if I wanted to copy this, but I don't want to duplicate it exactly the same, I can just roll the dice and get a different number here. Now sometimes you want things to be actually random, so I'm going to type in the first expression here. This is an extremely simple one. And now what you see is it's changing dynamically. And I can copy this anywhere else, and you're going to get different attributes. Every time that it's played, it's going to be a little bit different. And I think that adds interest, especially if you're looking at the same show multiple times. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. This could be applied to any effect that allows you to open an expression, or even those post-color modulations. Instead of doing sine waves, you can be random. So every time an event is rerun, you can have a random position, you can have a random color, you can have a random intensity, you can have a random size, and you don't know that by looking at my videos. It's on YouTube, of course, so it's always the same. But like if you watch them a couple times in the auditorium, you'll note that the location of things changes every time you see it, or the color of a certain thing changes every time you see it.
Now, even if your audience only sees your show once, and they only get one aspect, I mean, a lot of us are watching our own material quite a bit, and it's kind of nice to be surprised by your own material most of the time. The last thing I wanted to talk about before I turn over to Neil is render to frame. I use render to frame. A lot of what I'm doing is trying to convert some of these beam shows that were written all on one timeline and copy them over to different projectors, because unlike 5 years ago, we can afford to have 3 projectors or even more nowadays. So by taking parts of those shows, copying them over to different timelines, you can duplicate portions of that show, remove it from one timeline, shift it to another. But whenever you've got paired satellites, you don't want, you don't necessarily want things to move in the same direction back and forth. So now, of course, you can set your projectors and have things flip on the X or the Y axis. But another way of doing that very quickly is just put in a render to frame. So Chris did this earlier. We'll assign it to.
This is basically like flattening layers in Photoshop or Illustrator. It takes everything, pushes everything above us into a single frame.
So here I picked a blank frame, but when it actually draws to the frame, you're getting the same thing again. But what I can do is just very quickly make some manipulation. Let's say, let's change the z-axis on this, and all of a sudden, that whatever that you copied is going to look a little bit different. And of course, you can do a million things to it to add interest as you're copying things across. You'll be able to reuse the same effects multiple ways, make them interesting. There's just tons of things that you can do with render to frame. As Chris was saying, it's the ability to capture what you've already built from a bunch of different parts, and then manipulate that painting, and twist it around.
Right. One of the things that I kind of discovered a while ago is when you render the frame, it takes that data and dumps it into a frame in the catalog file. But that data in that frame is always updated in real time, so it's not a static snapshot. So if you have something that sets a pace that you want to keep constant through the duration of your show, you can put that in across the entire duration of your timeline, and then you could put render to frame in various places underneath that. So it takes that data, throws it to a catalog frame, but if you don't redisplay that catalog frame, it blanks it. So you can have one event across the duration of your show. You can blank it here and there without having to worry about the speed of that duration changing because your events are longer or shorter. Which is a trick that I wish I had known for some of my older shows, because I had in one of my shows I had kind of assignment that I made 30 different events for, and I had to go through and change the number of repeats in each of these events to keep the rate constant, and it just didn't turn into a huge mess.
So, some of the people in the chat room asked me to talk about curves, because I've been noticing how very, very useful they are. Before I do that, there's one thing I wanted to show you that Swami Dog kind of alluded to, but this is one of these examples where we do something a little bit differently, and it works. This is one of the first shows I ever did, and you can see there are lots and lots and lots and lots of stacked events on top of each other. That's possibly the only reason I opened it up, just so you can see how cluttered the timeline was before I learned this.
And there's certainly nothing wrong with taking that approach.
Nothing wrong.
I find, depending on the type of show that I'm doing, sometimes it's really nice to compartmentalize things into one single thing that just pull around.
And this is what I'm getting to.
Yeah, I mean, if you need to shift one of those things around,
You have to make sure you select every
Yeah.
single one of those events, and that can be very, very aggravating. As things progressed, I learned very quickly, this is another one, lots of stacked things, but I was starting to learn here, you can combine things. For example, if I zoom in here, this whole little sequence right here, I can select all of that very quickly, right click on it, and convert it. I have too many events, but the idea is,
Screenshot of that.
let's do something with not quite so many events. What I want to show you that you can take, this is a good example right here. You can take this stack of events and very quickly collapse them into a single SFX loop that Swan was using.
And the beautiful thing about these SFX loops is you can save them. And,
Yes,
and,
and then you have them in a list,
into other shows.
and you can put it in something else. And the other thing too is if you have a stack of SFX loops on your timeline, you can further collapse them into another SFX loop. Like that. And I think it's because I have, there we go. That's why I can see it. So it just took those and converted them into a single SFX loop, which is right here. And now I can just take that individual block and move it around instead of having to worry about all of those other events. So I wanted to show you that. But the big thing that I'm here to talk about is curves. So if we have an event here, any event, and I don't know, catalog. We need to load the catalog. Yeah.
Quick question while you're loading.
Yeah.
Is everything that's being shown available in all levels of LSX, or do you need a particular level to get at these things?
You should be.
This is all of us.
Yeah, the different levels really just limit
Number of
number of
projectors.
projectors.
And scanning optimization parameters.
But all of this stuff, the stuff that we're doing, you should be able to get to from.
The $130 version of LSX.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't
Cheap
have a lot of
version
money
too.
to be able to manipulate colors or anything like that. There's no limitation.
Here's the middle one, right?
You're welcome.
So here I've chosen an event, and I can go ahead if I want to and set some pre-parameters. It doesn't have to be huge, but let's just say it is what it is. And let's go ahead and take it out so you can see it. There it is. So there's our thing. And we want to do some things to it, but we want them to be very specific. In the past, what I would do is I would have whole stacks of things like remove X, or remove Y, or post move, or a rotation event. So I figured out when you hit the more button, more things show up for you to choose from. And some of those things are curve events. They have the same names like curve remove X, curve remove Y, curve rotate. The difference is if you choose one of those and you put it under your event, you have the ability to get to this window, which shows you a curve. You can add points to that curve. This line here allows you to pull the bar across the timeline. So you can see where
the time of that.
across the time of that event. And I like to change my grid to have more points because it gives me more granularity of control, and I'm just kind of that way, but you may not need that many options. You can change your overall bounds of your grid. If you want to, you can make it 0 to 1, say for an intensity event, for example. If you do intensity past 0 and go into the negative, it becomes something very strange. So you might want to set it to 0 to 1. But this is a movement event, so negative 0.5 to positive 0.5 is fine. Each point has a type. So if I add a point here, you see that this drop box changed to linear. I could change that to exponential, like Dave was showing earlier. And if I was to do that, the exponent would be here. And you could make it extreme, or you could make it go the other way. You could change it to Hermite, which is very much like a spline, except it's got a little more plateau, which is really nice if you want to have a little pause before you move on. One of my favorite things to do is to add another point and make the first one, like right now it appears to be a straight line in between them. If I change that to random, and then take this point and move it, what I've just done is set upper and lower limits on a random form. And that form, like they were explaining earlier, will change every time you load this curve. Like every time it plays a curve, that randomness is going to be different. So if you can be as specific or as general as you want, but it gives you a whole lot more control over how that parameter changes throughout the time of this event. So in some of my shows, I've actually gone through and put marks on the timeline, so I know where to put the cursor. Say I have a spot in my music here, so I put a mark there, and another one here. And it's a little bit convoluted, but you can pull your cursor here to one of these marks on your timeline. When you open the event, provided you don't click it like I just did, when you open the event, the cursor will still be in that spot, so you can see where to put your point, for example. Like that. And you can also be a lot more specific with points. Right now, I'm just dragging it around on a grid. But I could go up here, if I need to make a fine adjustment, you can go up to as many decimal places as you need to in these two boxes right here. 2, 8, 7, 5. Of course, the more decimal places, the less you can really see it. But I usually only use about 3 decimal places. But you can be as specific as you need to be if you just can't quite drag that point onto that spot in your music that you want. This is a very brief overview. All of the other parameters are there. Steps, like for this random form here, if I want to limit that a bit, I can add steps. And that just makes it appear a little bit more controlled. I like that sometimes. You can add repeats. Basically, you just select the point that you want to change. You see all my steps just disappear because I selected a new point. And then you can change the parameters for that point. You can shift the phase. There are a lot of different flexible things you can do here.
Again, all about
All of these without typing in any equations or doing any really difficult math. This is like, oh, I want a point here, and I want one here, and I want to do this in between them. And so what I found is I can have, it does top out at 21 vectors. So you might have to create 2 curve events.
But that's per event. Yes.
That's per event. And I've actually hit that limit before. But then, I found that instead of having a whole bunch of separate events back to back, I can just put in a curve event, put in my points, and create very interesting things in between them. And if you watch some of my shows this afternoon, you'll see some of those things being used.